That's the way in which Marx saw relations, as it were, between things, because commodities are things. Even when it's us. You know, if you're in a room full of people who sell insurance and you're trying to hire one of them, you're the executive, you're choosing between commodities. Now, someone will immediately object, of course, one of the people there may have a better personality. Great. That means that that's a feature of that commodity that's attractive to you as a buyer. That's why the person may get the job. So for Marx, that was the violence it committed, was it not only commodified our relations, but our lives, and put the pursuit of things in the place of a whole host, in place of a whole host of other needs, desires, in fact, the desire just for social relations themselves, which today is a real desire. Just the desire for a genuine social relation or two. One or two genuine social relations. So, now, that was the bad part on the social relations side for Marx. That's where capitalism was at loggerheads with the great ideals of freedom and so on, is because such human beings under such an economic system, because of competition with one another for what jobs were available in order to survive within such an economy, where working could only be called free labor as a kind of a joke. In other words, that whether we work or not, whether we make that as a choice is sort of a joke, right? Well, I can choose not to work. Well, the streets last night, as this city froze, were full of people who, I'm sure many didn't choose not to work, right? I doubt that a lot of them are lazy. Like Jesse Jackson, I don't think that that's the problem with poor people, is that they're lazy. But in any case, you choose not to work, you may very well find yourself under a bridge at night. One way you can find out, by the way, and this is simple to cut through a lot of the crap you usually hear about class analysis, and there are no classes in America. Here's a little empirical test for the audience to try. Don't work for 8 years. Stop working. And if really bad things happen to you, you were in the working class. If at the end of the 8 years everything's fine and dandy, you still got a house and a car and a nice place to live and a lot of nice friends, then you were okay. Otherwise, you were in the working class. But if you stop working for that long and you're in deep trouble, you were a worker and didn't know it. That's a nice empirical test, and I challenge any of you to try it. Someone who denies that there are classes can always give this one a shot. It's a way to find out if there are. Really find out. So those are some of the downsides. Classes are produced with unequal power. Social relations become, as it were, reified, frozen, phony, if you will. The upside is the upside that where Marx, I think, praises capitalism in terms beyond those ever used by William Buckley as a system that had produced from nature more wonders, more technological wonders than the whole previous history of the world had seen. In other words, the good things capitalism did was to build railways, medicines, and even more importantly, new needs. See, many of you may think that all this sort of negative talk's kind of old left wing, all whining after Bush. We shouldn't whine like that. We should be happy about it. You know, 1,000 points of light. That vision thing. But the upside of this is that new needs get produced. And for Marx, that was a revolutionary process. Because the system would never, as productive as it is, there'd be no way it could ever catch up to the level of need produced by it. Have you ever noticed that? Now think about, here's another example to think about, please. Remember how stereo sounded when you first got it instead of mono? Mono just played this one sort of flat music. Mono sounded okay when you first got it. It was better than that scratchy thing like this. And you got your first stereo and it was so exciting, and nobody even mentioned that the tapes you played on your stereo had a little hiss in them. But now to just put a tape in something, you hear that hiss, and you think about your friends that have a CD and they don't have that hiss. There's a new need now for hissless music. all around music, a whole new need. Now, apologists for the system want to say, well, that need, we didn't create that need. Well, that seems highly dubious. Think of commodities like the hula hoop. Does anyone remember the great hula hoop movement in the United States where people went around demanding hula hoops and then the capitalists went, we'll make them for you? Well, no, that movement didn't occur, see. There was no social movement called the hula hoop movement who went around, hula hoops are death, hula hoops are death. No, some jackleg went, I'll bet you if we make these things like this, put out a few records, people will be sweet. And the next thing you know, people needed them. And you just have to be nostalgic not to say they needed them. I mean, I heard someone the other day in the video store going, I need this VCR. And it was just as dramatic a statement for that person as someone in one of the third world countries that we plunder saying, I need rice. I mean, it's a new need. So capitalism's upside is it creates vast new technological abilities which extend the power of the human species. Extended until we can go to the moon, build a CD that doesn't hiss and so on. That's the upside of the system. Now, the problem Marx saw was that those two imperatives can come into contradiction. The imperative on the one hand of the economy, which now I'm going to state in its blunt Wall Street form, which is to make a profit, which you do by accumulating labor, capital goods, land, and so on. That imperative to create a profit versus the imperative to fulfill all these new needs. So, for example, and this is another classic example, solar energy, which is technologically available, and so it comes in conflict with the imperative, however, for profit. There are ways to make it. And when you hear these words, you know you have a contradiction of the kind Marx discussed. When you hear the words, we have that technology, but it's not cost effective, that phrase means we have the social forces of production to build it, but it is not consistent with our social relations based on profit. That's all not being cost effective means. It doesn't mean the technology isn't better, won't meet more needs, won't be safer, won't be better for the environment. It just quite simply means you have a contradiction between social relations that have these needs and the way that they're controlled by an economy that wants profit. And solar energy is only one among many similar examples. There's all of these sort of old truck driver stories about the ball bearings they use at NASA. I don't know if any of those are true. You always hear these sort of stories. Well, at NASA, they have ball bearings that are practically frictionless. And if we had them in our cars, we'd get 7,000 miles a gallon. Well, I don't know if that's true, but it could be, because clearly our technology, if we can get to the moon, we could build a better ball bearing that would triple gas mileage. That seems fairly clear. But that's within the capability of our technology. And much else besides, that won't be pursued because it's in contradiction with these economic imperatives. Now, what does all this have to do with the kind of lives people lead and morality? Well, everything. Because, as I tried to argue throughout the course, you give one society sort of Greek tragedy, the theater, and so on, and Greek ideals as a sort of model for how they live, and you get one kind of human being. Renaissance art, you get another kind of human being and other human projects. And then you get the Brady Bunch, you get another kind of human being and another set of human projects. Now, the vicious way to describe that situation is ideology. Some would take money and make big enemy, while I might take love and make good friends. Some are seeking pocket, the other are fleeking ratchet. But I'm here to teach you what's right from wrong. Say ideology. But it's an empty term. It simply means that if you want to know how someone thinks, look at how they dress, who they hang out with, where they live, right? The kinds of folks they went to school with. Sort of how big is their bank account, and you'll pretty much know where they're coming from. which is the banal West Texas way of stating Marxist theory of ideology. And it's right. It's true, you pretty much do. And it's not a rigid theory. It's not like you're never surprised, but you're rarely surprised. It's the best rough generalization about social relations that I know of. And it's supposed to remind us that moral dilemmas of the kind I discussed last time, which now I'm going to distance myself from by calling them merely philosophical dilemmas, have to be understood, and this is the point I want to draw from Marx today, in terms of being different for different classes. In other words, depending on what social situation you come out of, a moral dilemma may be quite different. The moral dilemma about whether to steal, an extra $25,000 on your tax return is a different kind of moral dilemma than the moral dilemma about whether you're going to rob a 7-Eleven to have enough food for the next month. And you'd have to be a moral imbecile not to see that there are important differences, right, between those decisions. They may both be decisions concerning theft, but they're important moral differences based on those decisions simply by virtue of something that to us today seems, I think, slightly unfair. Circumstance. I mean, in our country, it's really horrible to say this, but to call someone poor is not an insult. You haven't said anything about them. You've talked about their circumstance. It's a wonderful line in a play by Tennessee Williams where Deborah Carr and her old father, who's the poet, the play is Night of the Iguana. I think some of you may have seen it. She and her father come up and they go, yes, we're poor. And he goes, well, you say it as though you're proud of it. She goes, I'm neither proud nor ashamed. It's not what we are, it's just what has happened to us. It's really a hard way to think in our country because one way we allow ourselves, and now I'm going to stray from Marx for a moment because I just use his text. I don't really care if it's right. Because I think that to the extent we get something out of books, what we want to get is something out of them that we can use. And I haven't found any books where I can use all of it, or even most of it. That's certainly true with this one too. But just to stray from the text of Marx just a little bit, in our country, one of the ways that we can stand to have a society that's so opulent, and it's impossible to drive into this city and not feel it, to this Washington, D.C., and see the Pentagon and these amazing buildings, and then just see the bridges lined with people sleeping under it at night. How do we accept it as people who think that we're still human? How do we accept it and begin even cynically to accept it? Well, part of the reason for that, at least part of the reason, is that at some level, we must believe, and this now back to this freedom thing again, that it was their own sort of choices that got them there. So they're sort of, in some sense, to blame for being there. Now, I'll admit that no one ever quite spells it out that clearly. But in political discourse in our country, the implication is fairly clear. The implication was there, and we accepted it for years when Ronald Reagan used to hold up the want ads in front of TV. Well, they don't have to be there, look. Have you ever looked at the want ads and what's on it? They're like 14 jobs if you want in this dial-up porn business. Okay, there's a job for you. 28 or 9 jobs at McDonald's, and for the rest of them, you have to be able to read. That puts a lot of people under bridges already.